Hello, and welcome to day 4 of the Creative Compass Challenge with me, Jessica Abel of Autonomous Creative. In this challenge, you're going to learn to put your art and writing at the top of your to-do list and not down at the bottom where it falls off and never gets done. And we hate that. So this is the 4th day of 5 days of very simple, straightforward exercises. Not always easy, but they are simple that can unlock your ability to start finishing your amazing creative work without having to feel in control of every other little thing in your life first, because we know that's impossible and it's a standard we can't stick to. So, for this challenge, each day, I'm going to do a little bit of teaching and then I'll open the floor to questions. There have been amazing questions throughout this entire event. And so please make sure to drop your questions into the Q&A and I can get to them at the end. This is going to be a big one because we're going to talk about inner critic today. And I know that's a huge thing for so many people. So feel free to ask your questions. So, first of all, let's start with big takeaways from day 3 saying no. Have you said no? Have you tried the yes, no, yes sandwich? What happened? I really love Chris's takeaway from yesterday, which was when I said, your commitment to yourself is a full and complete answer to someone who requests your time. That is something I really want you to take to heart, no matter what else you walk away with, is that you have the right and the responsibility to make decisions for yourself and for what's best for you without other people being able to derail you and take that away from you. We don't always have the option to make decisions when we want to and the way we want to. So when we can, we must. We just absolutely must. That's how it works. So I'd love to see any other takeaways you have from yesterday, and especially any feedback. Like, if you've tried this yes, no, yes sandwich, if you tried to say no to something, if you had a conversation with someone to renegotiate boundaries, renegotiate rules, or anything like that, are you planning to do that over the next few days? Is there something that you've set up for yourself, a goal you've set up for yourself to start to minimize your overcommitment so that you can truly commit to the creative work that you are super excited about? Let's see what we have here. Okay. Caitlin says, I nicely kicked my husband out of my office yesterday when he wanted to hang out in the middle of my script writing session. Yes, saying no for the win. Yes, Caitlin. Being nice about it is important. It's not that you hate these people. It's just that they need boundaries. They need to understand this, right? Um, Jennifer Verino is one day behind on with the homework. I did the habit today. Turns out the time I picked didn't work that great, but the tea drinking is a good trigger. I think it's a good trigger. I mean, works for me, but that's great. If you figured out that it wasn't going to work the way it was, then you need to readjust. This is not about setting hard and fast rules and then holding yourself to them in some kind of, inhuman um, disciplinary kind of way. It's about really paying attention to what works for you and using that information to move forward in a way that's going to be more effective. Okay, let's see. Pamela says, I just feel so guilty and selfish. You feel guilty and selfish because you are saying no to other people. And if that's the case, then I would think about, that is something that you really need to get into and think like, well, what am I expecting of myself? Frequently, the level to which we expect ourselves to perform for other people is, I mean, it's literally not possible. And you couldn't do that for all of the people who need it for you. So, the idea that you would just deplete yourself completely for other people. And if you're not utterly just like, you know, lifeblood on the floor for everyone else before you do your own thing, the idea that that is what's expected of us, that's all. I mean, I don't want to get political here, but that is completely a feminist issue. Your time and your focus and your ability to take care of yourself and do things that matter to you, whether or not the entire world is taken care of, that is a feminist issue. And I encourage you to try to reframe it that way for yourself and understand that it is your job to make those boundaries. And in some cases, like if you're around other people, other women, other people who allow themselves to be sort of used dry that way, women or people who are not women, um, you can model this for them. You can help them do a better job in their own lives of creating healthy boundaries if you're able to do it yourself. So it's an act of courage, and I encourage you to try it. Okay. Anne says, I said no to myself when I started thinking that the picture book that I'm working on should really be a graphic novel. Ha ha ha, no. Well, maybe. But I need to work the picture book all the way through before I add a lot more work on my plate. I think that's Very valid. So it's possible that this thing should morph into a graphic novel, but if it's gonna be a graphic novel, you need to know the entire arc of it regardless, right? You're gonna need to know the whole thing. And so, doing it as a picture book first could end up being the final product. You could get there and think, "This is complete, I don't need anything else." Or it could be a very final draft, thinking through the whole project. So you could nothing is wasted. Nothing you're doing is wasted, even if you switch gears on something. Uh, Thinking of it like you're throwing this labor away is going to stop you from making those more authentic decisions to what you know is true. Tamara says, "I am in the position that the person I need to say no to most is myself, or rather, my inner procrastinator." Procrastination, as we've established, is mostly about not deciding. So if you need to say no to yourself, then you need to go back to day one and think about priorities, criteria, and making choices that make sense to you and that you can really stick to. PCM says, "I loved the firm no over the maybe as making it so much easier to be clear for them too. It's what I want to hear from friends, honesty. I respect the boundaries of others." Yeah, so great. So yes, like that is it. Think of it as a kindness. I mean, it's tough. It's not easy to hear. It's not easy to say. Once you say it, it's clean. And that is something that we want from other people and that they want from us. Jimena says, "I had to say no today to a commitment because I wasn't feeling well and used the yes, no, yes sandwich, and the other person completely understood." I love that. That's awesome. And you don't need the excuse of not feeling well either. Just being clear like that it can be a gift to everybody. Okay. Aman says, "Aside from paying yourself first, the other thing that stayed with me is saying yes to scrolling Instagram for an hour is saying no to working on your project for an hour, which is a nice reminder when I find myself about to scroll. What am I about to say yes or no to?" What a good question. Such a good question. When you're just about to do something, what am I saying yes to? What am I saying no to? What a good way to frame that. I love that. Thank you. Okay. Martha says about selfishness, "When you take care of yourself by nourishing your innate creative urge, you more ably and happily care for others." That's absolutely true. When you feel that you are centered in yourself, that you have a sense of agency over your life, then you're able to make really good decisions about taking care of other people in whatever time you have available to do that. This isn't about cutting yourself off and retiring to your ivory tower so that your wife can leave, you know, warm, fully cooked meals at your doorstep so that you never have to exit and don't take care of anybody but your creative process. Sounds lovely for a few days, but honestly, that is not a life any of us even want. What we want is to have an integrated life of love and relationships and responsibility to the world, and also an ability to focus on what's important to us internally and create new things in the world that will make beauty and understanding and complexity and sophistication for our audience and for the people who are going to receive these works. And that's so important. There's nothing more important than art in the world when it comes down to it. It's all about communicating something real from one person to another person. And at the end, what else is there? Okay, let's get on to day 4. Speaking of big topics, inner critic has come up all the time already. People haven't been saying the word inner critic, but I can hear it when they're talking about feeling guilty, when they're feeling bad about stuff, when they're self-flagellating about one thing or another. That's the inner critic, or in this creative focus workshop, we call it the should monster for historical reasons, because basically a very early student drew a little monster and that's where this all came from. So the inner critic is just a term for this critical voice that can rear up and just kind of like try to whack you back down every time you try to commit to anything creative, or sometimes even just manage your ordinary to-do list. You know that you should be able to do all of these things and also spend an hour at the gym and also spend a bunch of focused time with your 4-year-old and everything else, right? Like you should be able to do all those things. Those shoulds are your inner critic trying to beat you up. It can be an outpouring of negative self-talk. It can be more of like a kind of inner, bullhorn wielding, drill sergeant. There's different sort of ways that this can appear to you. But as many times as you tell your inner critic just to shut up and leave you alone, it doesn't, right? That's not effective. And if you Google inner critic, you're going to find silence your inner critic and tame your inner critic and defeat and kill and whatever your inner critic, um, all of which sounds great when you're in the moment of being attacked by this voice, right? This sensation of, angst and pain. But I've actually learned from an expert on this topic that that is exactly the flip of what we should be doing in order to minimize that voice, right? So the outcome that we're going for is to minimize that critical voice. And by trying to push it away and repress it, it's not going to happen. So I was talking to, I learned from Nicole Lewis Keeber, who I did an interview with on my podcast, which you can find if you'd like. And she is a former clinical therapist, and she now is what she calls a business therapist. So she works with small business owners to help them do no harm. That's the name of her program. But her work is so applicable to creatives that I invited her on the podcast because I was just like, we have to hear about this. Basically, she reframed that inner critic, that inner critical voice, um, and said that what this is it's a trauma response, and that all of us have various kinds of trauma in our lives, and it may not be big T trauma. You may not have been beaten up as a child or anything like that. And I mean, I really hope you weren't. And if you were, all the worse. But we all experience small T trauma in different ways, especially when you're creative and you are hearing people dismiss your work or belittle you. Chris posted at the top of the chat this morning uh, a story that his wife had been called for jury duty and had asked to be dismissed because her employer doesn't pay while she's not there. And the jury captain said, "Well, aren't you, are you married?" And she said, "Yes." "Well, what does your spouse do?" And she said, "He's an artist." And so the guy's like, "Oh, please, you can go home," which is a terrible story. Funny, but terrible because, like, what is that all about? And that was what Chris was saying. But that is a kind of trauma, right? Saying like, "Oh, starving artists. Like you're starving. You want to be an artist? Well, that's fine for you. I guess you can afford to do that. I guess that's privileged. I guess that's something else." Being dismissive about your work. All of these things, you take them in, right? Whether you want to take them in or not. You listen to them. Negative voices are more powerful than positive voices with us. Unfortunately, we listen to this stuff, and really, we're more likely to believe a negative piece of feedback than a positive piece of feedback. It's like biological. It's who we are, and all of this has to do with who we are as animals, as like human beings being highly developed animals. That we have various kinds of instincts to protect ourselves. So the should monster then is the voice of yourself at a different time in your life when you were really hurt, trying to protect you from being hurt again in the same way. So if you tried to do art or theater or something I mean, I did theater in like junior high, in elementary school, and had some very hurtful things happen, right? People sort of laughing at me for doing this or whatever. I quit doing it. I didn't do it anymore. I'm not particularly sorry about that. I went another way that's, happy for me and I don't mind. But like that experience then gets imprinted on the idea of getting up in front of people and performing. You start to get embarrassed by you might get laughed at or something like that. I don't have a lot of stage fright. It's not something that's a huge issue for me. But if you do have something like stage fright, it may have to do with either big T or small t trauma that happened in your past. And basically, your inner critic is saying, don't get up there, don't take a risk, don't expose yourself to this kind of criticism. Same thing with art, writing, anything else where you essentially are like ripping your chest open and giving people your heart. You're saying this matters to me. And if they are mean about it, or if they dismiss it, or if they just ignore it is the worst, right? The worst is just nobody pays attention at all. All of those things hurt so much that your inner critic is like a bouncer going like, no, 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 nobody's going to hurt my baby, and getting in front of you to try to prevent this from happening. But the upshot of that is that you don't get to take these risks that are so important and crucial for making creative work. So the methodology that Nicole shared, and I recommend that you check out. She has a book as well. Her name is Nicole Lewis Keeber, and we'll make sure that's in the description to the video and so on. She has some methods to kind of try to handle this. But essentially, you need to tell yourself as a grown up, like this often happens when you're a younger person, you're in a vulnerable place, you have a vulnerable relationship with whoever it is who is being critical of you in some way. But you're now a grown up and you have tools and you have made a conscious decision, a very considered decision with criteria that this is what you want to be doing, that you want to do this, that this matters to you, you want to do it. That's an adult decision with a lot of strategy and composure that goes into it. And your younger self is screaming to stop you from doing that thing because it feels so dangerous. You need to be the grown up in the room. You need to go over to that younger self and put your arm around them, give them a little hug and go like, I know this is scary, but we can do this, And Nicole would say, what do you need? I see you there. What do you need? And in a kind way, not in a like, what do you need? What do you want from me? But like in a kind way, like, okay, I see you. I see you feel vulnerable. How can I help you? And feeling even like understanding that you are the adult in the room and that you've made this decision can help just lower the volume on this. I'm not going to say this is going to get rid of everything. Of course it's not. But bit by bit, you can get a little bit of distance from that very painful criticism, especially when you start to understand that it is you. It is you doing this. Of course, it's you. It's in your head. I mean, we're not dissociating here, but it's literally like a manifestation of a you who has been hurt before. And what that you needs is not anger and dismissal and repression, but understanding and appreciation and soothing. That's what they need. And so I really encourage you to try that. So what I want to ask you, and I know this is very tough stuff. I don't want anybody to share anything that feels, too vulnerable here. I'm not asking anybody to say anything that doesn't feel safe to say. But I would love it if anybody feels okay about this to share. Have you identified something specific that triggers your inner critic or your should monster? And that feels like it's connected in some way to something specific it's trying to protect you from. If you can look at like, what are you trying to do? And what is your inner critic or your should monster trying to protect you from what does it not want to happen? And then I think this kind of goes back to some stuff we talked about yesterday, that you can make a plan for yourself. You can say, okay, well, what if that does happen? I'm freaking out about this thing. I had a podcast interview yesterday for a show that's going to come out in a few weeks. And the host was asking about this. Well, what do you do when you're just like, you get to 95% and you just can't get it done? You can't commit to finished. And this is what I was saying is that you can create a plan for yourself for caring for that part of you that feels vulnerable and essentially do a worst case scenario. Like what could literally happen that is the worst thing that you can imagine from taking this action? And then what would you do if that happened? Who would you go to? Where would you get support? Where would you get some kind of solace for that? What next steps would you take from that? What are the other things that might happen? What are good things that might happen that you would have to deal with? Like, so bad things, somebody's horrible to you when you have a show, like an art show opening or something like that, and says terrible things about your art in person to you. What would you do? How would you act? Okay. Probably would never happen. But it could conceivably happen. So how would you behave? All right. On the other hand, you get a starred review from Jerry Saltz or something, really famous critic in the art world, and all of a sudden galleries come calling and there's collectors and they want work and they want stuff from you. That's the other end of it. What do you do then? Like, how are you going to act then? So we're thinking ahead a little bit and sort of creating scenarios again with your adult brain on and thinking about like, how is this going to work? You know, how am I going to handle this? And planning for it can help you sort of calm those nerves and calm that inner self that is really suffering in that moment. Okay. Uh, Jimena says, my inner critic doesn't want me to charge for my service or to charge quote unquote too much. Okay, good. So when you're trying to charge money for what you're selling, what your work, your inner critic says like, no, 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 don't charge too much. You shouldn't charge money for that. Why? So the next question is why? Where does that come from? Who told you that? In what context did you learn that? Where, and it may be many places, it may have been reinforced many times. That is a message that creatives get a lot. And a lot of it has to do with, art should be from your heart. It should be something that's, a passion, and so you shouldn't charge money for it, or maybe art isn't worth anything. So what are those messages? And then do you align with those messages? Do you actually believe those things? If you don't actually believe those things, then you don't need to act on that, right? You can act on different information. So again, getting a little analytical about it can really help break that stuff down. Nora says, my should monster has some style issues with what it perceives as kitsch potential in a way very similar to my parents' ideas about how art should look. Very good insights. So if your parents had perhaps strong opinions about what was kitsch and what was art, what were those related to? Was it a class issue? Was it something about if they have something that's kitsch in their home, would people think X about them? Was it, fear-based for them? What went into that? And again, can you get a little bit of distance on that as a grown-up and say, "I actually don't buy that. I don't think it's true." And then help your that voice to kind of chill out and say like, "Okay, we have dealt with this issue before and we understand where we stand on this." Martha says, "And is that worst case scenario worse than staying stuck and blocked and unfinished?" Good point, Martha. I would agree. I would say it is not, that doing anything is better than doing nothing. Any kind of results you get, even if you get some negative results, there are going to be positive results as well mixed in there. And it's worth doing. But it is, but like, again, your adult brain has to say that. Your adult brain has to be the part that comes in and says, yeah, but that could happen. But think of all the other things that are going to happen as a result of this. Kyla, critics from close family literally saying to one another, what has she actually done? I can't tell you how much that cuts to the core every time I think about it. Um, I'm so sorry you've had to experience that, Kyla. It's awful. It's absolutely inexcusable. And it's not true. And so again, it's this, they're trying to put you in your place, right? They're trying to say, like, what you do is not important. It's not like what we do. It doesn't count. And that has to do with things having to do with their own stature and standing and how they think about their lives and what's important and what's not. Again, it's not you, it's them, right? It's all about them. And so all of this it's negotiation over time, but getting used to thinking it through from this kind of point of view. Matt says, today finally got it from this discussion and found a positive rerouting that might help me unpack this. My fear that I won't be able to communicate and that my stories will be incoherent and thus not transmitted. Maybe I can use the should monster instead as a stage to consider how the current work communicates and give myself more time to intervene and explore strategies. Should monster transmuted to tool. Excellent. I love turning it around and making it positive. I would also say, like, partly, I think your should monster is trying to protect you from putting your work in front of people and finding out that it doesn't do what you want it to do. And I would encourage you to proactively do that. Take your drafts and sketches and ideas and talk to people about them and see if they communicate. And if they don't, you use the feedback from the people to change it in a way that makes it work, does what you want it to do. So instead of letting it stop you and saying, like, okay, well, I don't know if this is going to be perfect and communicate perfectly, so I can't do it. And the should monster saying, like, don't start. I'm saying instead, do it and try it with people, maybe before you completely finish so that you can make modifications if necessary. And then you have evidence to go on, go this direction, go that direction. That's how real world feedback is going to help your work be better and help you feel stronger and like you have the right to share it in the world. Tamara says, I undervalue my rates in my freelance life because of the inner critter, LOL, says I should question my value. Um, Capital T trauma here. Yeah. Lou adds capitalism is the OG capital T trauma. Am I right? Yeah. Yes. And Tamara, I'm sure there's other capital T trauma you're talking about here as well. We know you're valuable. We know your work is valuable. And being around other people who care about that and who help you reinforce that feeling is going to help walk through it. But also, I mean, a lot of this stuff has to go to therapy, right? You have to get sort of rework these valuing yourself in the hands of a professional, which I am not. I'm not a therapist. But the point is that when you're able to reframe that for yourself, and when you're able to understand that your value is real, then you when that voice comes up, you can get distance on it. You can put it in a box and saying, "Huh, that's interesting. That happened. What am I gonna do now?" Right? How do I move forward? Okay, this is really good stuff, you guys. Thank you so much for sharing. There are a couple of questions today. PCM says, "How to not feel like a fraud if not being paid for what one does." So, uh if you feel that you need to be paid for what you're doing in order to have for the work to have value, you are allowing capitalism to set the value of art making. You're saying that art is only valuable if it's making money, right? And I know you don't believe that. I know that you don't believe in the world that um, the only way that art is valuable is if it's bought and paid for. It becomes commodity at that point to a certain extent. There's nothing wrong with selling your work and getting money for it. That's absolutely fine. But it is a parallel and separate concern from making the work and for the work being valid and needing to exist in the world, right? Art's essential characteristic for me, like and this is my personal opinion, this is how I feel about it. What art is communication. It's a communication of something from inside my head, some feeling, some vision, some story, some information. I'm trying to take that, what's inside me, and convey it into somebody else's head via a medium. And that medium is art. It can be writing, it can be visual, it can be sound, combination of all the above, whatever else you can come up with, right? That's why I think art is such an open-ended subject, right? Like, what is art? Well, how are you going to define it? Well, that for me is the definition is communication. Nothing to do with money. Money is over here in parallel, and some forms of communication have a certain kind of value for other people, and so they'll pay for it, right? So a client who hires you to make an image for their business is hiring your ability to think visually to convey something for their business, and they'll pay you for it, right? So somebody who wants to read a really great story and you're a writer may pay you for a copy of your story so that they can experience this you know emotional landscape or storytelling, escape, whatever it is, through your work, and so it has monetary value. But sometimes, and if you think about it, like the two examples I just gave you, somebody who's going to buy a book might spend $25 for it, might go to the library and get it for free, might spend $1 for it, might get given it by somebody, might find it for free. They're probably not going to spend $5,000 for a story. A company who's hiring an illustrator to make an image for their company could pay $100, could pay $1,000, could pay $10,000, depending on the image and what it's going to be used for, right? So there's difference in the amount of money that you're being paid for these things. Is there a difference in the value of the work? No. The work is communication. And the matchup of how much people are willing to pay for a thing and the value of the thing is really complicated and has to do with so many other factors. That if you start making that a criterion for getting started, you'll never get started. So I don't know if that answers a question. I'm kind of just talking about this in various ways, but I feel like this is just such a hang up and such a problem for artists. It's asking for permission, right? You're saying, I need permission from other people to make my work. I need other people to say this is valuable and I need them to pay me money before I can make my work. And I say you do not need permission. All of this entire week is about not needing permission. You do not need permission to make your work. So, PCM, do this without permission. Okay. One last question. Which version of you is your should monster trying to protect? I think it's trying to protect the adult version of me, keeping me safe from being judged by others, saying stuff like, why aren't you successful by now? I mean, maybe if the adult version of you right now is highly concerned with being successful now, today, then maybe it is the adult version to a certain extent. But also, I feel like I mean, for me, certain ideas about success were formed in me when I was a child. What does success look like? What do other people think real success in the world looks like? And I'm holding myself to that standard, not to a standard about me, what I think is success. Remember, we talked about criteria on day one? What are your criteria for success? Your criteria. Maybe it involves money. It's totally fine if it does, but it probably involves a bunch of other stuff too. And so you may be successful in some criteria and not on other ones. You may want to make decisions in order to move forward to be more successful with certain criteria, but understanding what your personal criteria of success are and not using an externally imposed uh, version of success is what we're talking about here. So when you say keeping me safe from being judged by others saying stuff like, why aren't you successful by now? They think success is something, you think it's something else. So why should you care? The adult version is going to be like, whatever, success, you say success, I say I'm having a great time, like I'm doing really well. A child version would feel more threatened by that. So I think that's the point that Nicole's trying to make is that when you're in a position where you believe what other people say, you're usually in a position of lower power to them, where they tell you this is the truth and you go, okay, I guess that's the truth. And then you have to live up to that, right? And so often that's when you're in a position of when people can hold power over you and wield and misuse power over you. And that's what it is creates that trauma response. All right. So that was a rough one today, you guys. Thanks for sticking with it. And I really encourage you to keep thinking about this and keep working on it. All right. So we have one more day. So exciting for the Creative Compass mini course or the Creative Compass challenge, I should say. One more day for the Creative Compass challenge coming up, day 5. And don't forget on day 6, bonus day, I'll be doing the Creative Engine Masterclass. And this class will fill in some of the missing pieces from the Creative Compass challenge, in particular, how skipping steps in this creative process can trigger your inner critic. So there's specific things that you will do or not do that will sort of cause that inner critic to leap out at you. So I will teach you about how to predict and avoid some of these triggers and minimize them at least, and how to use the creative process itself to keep you moving. I will see you tomorrow for Creative Compass Day 5, the last day. We will get very specific about what exactly to do next and use the power of conscious pre-decision to make it easy to keep building momentum. I'm Jessica Abel of Autonomous Creative. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you tomorrow.